are, please feel free to change your name now. If you have any questions for this evening, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will double check in a second, but I don't think we've got any pre-asked questions. So I'll be kicking off with whoever gets into the comments first. Okay, lovely. So for those of you who've not been to one of these before, my name is Jo Southall. I'm an independent occupational therapist. I specialise in working with people who have complex long-term conditions, in particular hypermobility disorders. I also live with hypermobile EDS, POTS, and a load of random other stuff, basically. So my work, my business is all about supporting people to build their own health toolkit. And what that basically means is looking at a combination of coping strategies, equipment, people, knowledge and education, so that whatever your uncooperative bodies and minds chuck at you, you already have a solution in mind for. Hopefully this evening we can get through all of your questions, but if you've got anything you'd like to know more about, or if I only partially answer your question and you've got follow-up questions, please stick those in the chat as well, and we will go from there. Okay, so first question, do you advise on taping? This is an interesting one. So there's different kinds of taping for different purposes. The one I tend to recommend most, and the one I personally use most, is kinesiology taping. And this is quite an interesting one because according to the peer review fancy research, kinesiology taping should not work as well as it does. What it does do is improve proprioception. So proprioception is a very long and complicated way of saying your body's awareness of where you actually are in relation to yourself and also your environment. So good proprioception is what allows you to walk through a door frame without hitting either of the sides. And bad proprioception is when you try to walk through a door frame, get the door handle stuck down your dressing gown sleeve, fall over, bang your elbow on the door frame, and then stumble into the room shortly afterwards. Oh, lovely. Thank you. My link fairies just sent me the questions I missed earlier. So kinesiology taping, what that basically does is improve your body's awareness of where you are. And this does two things. Firstly, it makes it more likely that you will be able to successfully move from A to B because you actually know where A is. You have an understanding of how you fit into your environment. The second thing it does is give you more awareness of where your own body is. So what can happen to people who've got a lot of joint problems and a lot of pain is that we get quite switched off from what our bodies are trying to tell us. Basically, the solution becomes, if I can ignore everything I get in terms of sensory input, it won't hurt anymore, which is kind of true, but still not particularly advisable. So if you are quite switched off from your body and your body awareness is not good and you don't really tune into what your body's getting up to and you start to twist an ankle, often you won't notice that until you get to the point where you've got sharp stabby pains or you've already fallen over. With increased proprioception, you are increasing your chances of noticing what's going on with your own body before you get to the major injury stage. So what we can do is reduce the amount of damage, reduce the frequency of injuries, and make us more aware of the sorts of things that are causing injuries on a regular basis. Is that making a little bit of sense? I hope it is. So kinesiology taping is something that I do recommend quite a lot. The difficulty with all forms of taping is that adhesives can be quite harsh for those of us with quite sensitive skin in two ways, either in allergy format or simply because the tape adhesive is stronger than the connections between our own skin because delicate hypermobile people. So if you are going to use taping, do not ever peel the tape off. Just don't. Even if you have to be in the bath for 3 hours or lay under a wet towel or use baby oil or conditioner or some kind of spray that breaks down tape adhesive, do something to soak that tape off rather than peeling it. And if you can soak your tape off effectively, you will probably find that your skin integrity is much better, you tolerate taping better, and you cope with it longer term. There is some information on my website about taping, the kinesiology taping. One of the things in that article is a link to a Pinterest board I've put together with different kinesiology tape tutorials for different body parts. So my wonderful link fairy will hopefully rustle that up for me. But that might be a good thing to test out, just to see, if it's a useful thing for you to do. If you are currently under a physiotherapist, or you're seeing any kind of like injury rehab type specialist, quite a lot of them have done additional training on taping and can either do it for you or teach you or a family member or a friend how to do it to make sure you're getting the most out of it. If you are taping yourself, what I would advise is taking photos of tape so that when you get it spot on, you've got a record of what spot on looks like, and you can hopefully replicate that next time. Whereas guesstimating it each time, you may find that you do a much better job some weeks than others, and you don't really know why, but photos will hopefully help with that consistency. So in short, yes, tape can be really good, but please be careful of your skin. And if you're not sure where to start, speak to a physiotherapist about that one. Okay, so pre-asked questions, which I should have started with, so apologies there, brain fog. Work-life balance. Currently okay on reduced hours at work, but worry about going back to full-time. I'm assuming lots of people feel the same, so after some tips or ideas, really. Yeah, so working full-time is a lot for anyone. It's particularly a lot for people whose bodies don't really handle things like stress or repeat postural change or heavy lifting or walking or standing very well. One of the things I would really have a think about is prioritization. So we talk a lot about pacing as in how you break an activity down, but prioritizing is the next step. So even if you are pacing yourself really, really well, very few people will have the energy for full-time work, full-time family life, full-time hobbies, full-time self-management. There isn't enough energy to go around. It just doesn't work that way. So if you are thinking about going to work full-time, you may find you do have to compromise in other areas. So as an example, if you want to prioritize work, your income is probably going to be slightly higher. What you might be able to do with that is get a cleaner, get a meal delivery service, get your laundry sent out and done by somebody else. Whereas if you're working part-time and you're saving that energy, you may be able to put that energy towards house and home type stuff. What tends to happen for people who don't deliberately prioritize is you end up accidentally prioritizing one aspect of your life over the others. And if you're not making a conscious decision to do a certain aspect, we can end up neglecting things that end up making us really unwell. As an example, not making time for physiotherapy means that you decondition. When you decondition, your pain gets worse. When your pain gets worse, your sleep gets worse. And before you know it, you're signed off sick. So it is worth really having a think about, is working full-time actually in your best interests? If it is, what can you compromise on in other areas of your life? I always try to remind people of this, but like disability benefit, personal independence payment, for those of you with permanent mobility impairments or ongoing care needs, existing as a disabled person is expensive. It just is. Even if you are working, you may well be entitled to some kind of benefit support. I would encourage you to take that. It may be the difference between whether or not you can have a cleaner. It may be the difference between whether or not you can afford the odd private physio appointment. Things like kinesiology tape, as an example we've just discussed, is a constant ongoing cost. And there is support available for that. So my hope would be that if you can access that support, it will help you in prioritizing and balancing other aspects of your life. I would also have a little bit of a planning/strategy meeting about reasonable adjustments. So reasonable adjustments are a legally protected right for disabled people who are employed. If you attempt to ask for reasonable adjustments, unless your office or your employer can justify them as not being unreasonable, they are breaking the law by not letting you have them, basically. The difficulty with reasonable adjustments is that it's a really vague concept. So what I consider to be perfectly reasonable may be completely unreasonable by the standards of your average office worker. That said, you won't know that until you've had the conversation about it. So I would strongly suggest having a think about areas in your work that may mean that you survive it a little bit better. So as an example, I know that I don't cope well with having my feet down when I'm sitting in chairs. So I don't use a chair. I'm actually in bed at the moment. I do all of my work from bed because my feet are up and it makes my POTS easier to manage. When I translate that to a university setting, when I'm studying or working, I can't be in bed, but I can put my feet up, or I can sit on a chair and put my feet up on my own wheelchair. Gamer chairs or office chairs with footrests are an option. So it may be that something as simple as putting your feet up more makes a big difference in terms of your cognitive function and your ability to self-manage. It may be things like if you are having back-to-back meetings, can you schedule some buffer time in so that you're getting extra breaks in between each one? And those are protected times where you can self-manage, pace, lay down, medicate, fidget, have a snack, do whatever you need to do. It's also maybe worth considering things like flexible times and flexible working. Quite a lot of hypermobile people have sleep issues as part of their package of symptoms. If you know you are a total night owl and you have a tendency towards painsomnia, starting work at 7 a.m. is going to be rough. Starting work at 9, 10, or 11 a.m. and then working later may be preferable. And that's often something that can be accommodated. It's just that nobody's thought to do it before. So once you ask for it, it might be doable. If nothing else, things like working from home, flexible use of when you take your lunch breaks can also be really effective. And things like actually just having a pillow and a yoga mat so you can stretch out on the floor for 10 minutes in between whatever it is you're doing can make a real difference in terms of symptom management. So really have a think about which aspects of work are either daunting or problematic or exhausting, and see if you can modify those or come up with ways in your daily life to save a bit of energy. So yeah, hopefully that works. Okay. Finding alternative employment. Working on a computer or laptop may not be the best for me moving forwards. Is it common for others to have to change careers or jobs? Yes. Actually, occupational therapy is my backup career, having already lost the ability to do my original career. So my starting point in life was outdoor adventure. I was an outdoor adventure instructor. I taught rock climbing for a living. It became quite abundantly clear very quickly that working 40 foot up a tree as a part-time wheelchair user was not a consistent and sensible career path. So OT is actually my backup career. Don't get me wrong, I love it. I think I love it more than my previous job, but it was a change made necessary by my health. A lot of people find themselves in similar situations. I think one good thing that came out of COVID lockdowns was that employers have got a lot more creative about how you can do jobs. So working from home, flexible hours, adaptive workspaces, that kind of thing. A lot of people are slightly more accepting of now, which is a good thing. That said, for people who have difficulty with speech or difficulty with hand, wrist, shoulder issues, computer work can be a real issue. Also, for people with neck issues, computer work can be a real problem. There are quite a few things you can do to adapt a workspace that will hopefully make it a little bit easier to use. So I'm going to run through those just on the off chance that they're useful. A lot of these will be accessible through Am I back? Sorry about that. Not quite sure what's going on. I just got kicked out. Chat. Hopefully people can see me now. Link Fairy, can I just get you to spotlight me again, please? Thank you. Okay, I'm back, I think. Thank you. Lovely. Access to work. That's the thing I was talking about. Yeah, access to work. Yeah, basically what they can do is send somebody out and have a look at your access needs to really tinker with ways that they may be able to adapt your job to make it easier. I have seen access to work fork out for frankly ridiculous pieces of equipment that are borderline unjustifiable because they're so expensive. And yet it's a game changer if you can get the right work set up. So I've already seen, Emily sharing their workspace in the chat. That looks fantastic. So these kinds of things there is quite a lot you can do. Things like voice dictation. There's a suite of programs called Dragon Naturally Speaking. So what Dragon does is make your desktop or your laptop usable completely by voice. So I can say things like move the cursor up, stop, left click, rather than physically having to do it. I can also dictate all of my notes as an example that I'm making for work. One of the really cool things about Dragon is that it's teachable. So whereas, a lot of built-in voice dictation struggles with things like medical or career-specific terminology, Dragon, you give it a load of your documents to read, and it will basically pop up with all the words it doesn't understand. And you teach it those, and then it can voice dictate them as well, which is really cool. There are also some nifty little bits of kit I really, really like, which is basically a series of, they're pivoting desk armrests. I will see if I can find a link for them. But basically it's a little like resting pad that goes on your forearm with a series of pivots that hold away from the desk. So your arms rest on those and it completely takes the weight off your arms. So you're only responsible for directing movement, not for physically holding your arms up. And something like that can be the difference between being able to work consistently and horrendous flare-ups. So although, yes, career changes are common in general, but also within the hypermobile community, you may find career change is not necessary if you have the appropriate modifications in place to support you continuing with that job. So access to work is a sensible thing to look at. There is a company called Posturite, Posturite, and they literally specialize in ergonomic desks, chairs, and tech. And what you can do is actually have a consultation with a Posturite specialist who will then recommend all of the products that will, work for your setup and meet your needs. So particularly if you've got employers that are quite motivated to keep you in the job, getting a Posturite assessment through work would potentially be a really sensible thing to do. Lovely. Okay. I'm struggling mentally to cope with the vicious cycle of inactivity, fatigue, weight gain, and low energy. I feel these all have a knock-on effect with each other. Less active, more mental energy, but gain weight, or more active, worn out, and only sustain weight. Again, after any tips or ideas on how to combat this or to find a routine, I'm more obliged to stay in full-time employment to pay somebody, so catch-22. Yeah, okay. You're right, this is a vicious cycle, and I think the damage that chronic stress and chronic fatigue and burnout does to your hormones is probably not helping at all with your weight management. A lot of the response to stress can have massive dietary changes, but also changes in terms of how our bodies process food and how much we're holding on to, and it's a really it is a horrible vicious circle. I think there's a lot to be said for combination approaches. So this is why a multidisciplinary team is such a wonderful thing to work as part of. What you're probably going to find is that trying to fix one area of your life doesn't kind of miraculously solve everything. But getting the appropriate kind of emotional support whilst also improving your pacing skills may be the starting point to putting you on a slightly more sustainable path. I know myself and Kim Claydon, online psychotherapist, we share quite a lot of clients. There's a lot of overlap. And actually, I love that because we do different things, but it's very complementary. So it may be that actually what you need to do is a little bit of a hard reset and go, okay, I'm going to really focus on rehabilitation and I'm going to work on these 5 things. And you find people to support you with that. Yes, you will need to stay employed, which is difficult. It does complicate things. But it may be that you can kind of compromise in other areas to maybe get yourself some appropriate support for that. I am doing rather conveniently, actually, doing a joint protection session with the HMSA coming up soon. And part of what it focuses on there is actually how to be active, but in a safe way. A lot of the issues with things like trying to manage weight, we get told that exercise is like a thing you have to do. And then when you try and exercise, you damage yourself really badly. And then you're injured again, and then you're miserable being injured. So you just want to eat something to feel better, and then you're back to square one. Learning to move safely and to understand your pain and to understand your symptom flare-ups is going to be a really important part of that as well. I have talked fairly extensively about pacing, both in these sessions and online, but it is a service I offer. So please do come and talk to me about pacing. I have done, I think, 3 podcasts with a lady called Natasha Lipman. Her podcast is called The Rest Room, and I have given away in various sections most of my best advice for free on those podcast episodes. So please check those out. Another thing it's worth looking at would be smart monitoring. So the Visible app is one example of this, but you don't actually have to pay a subscription fee to Visible to get pacing advice. Something like a Garmin smartwatch. Anything with a body battery and a heart rate variability monitor is what you're after. So with smart monitoring, what we're looking to do is to try and understand these patterns of stress, activity, tachycardia, and sleep, and what effect they're having on our bodies. So what you can start to do is recognize when you're on like a downward flare-up type trajectory and take appropriate restful action before you reach full-on crash point. It can also be useful to teach us about what activities day to day are causing problems. So as an example, I used to find that some mornings after getting up and dressed, I would crash, and I wasn't really sure why. Some mornings I was fine, other mornings I wasn't. It wasn't till I started doing heart rate monitoring really strictly that I realized the difference was on days where I attempted to braid my hair stood up, I would get quite tachycardic doing that and then crash afterwards. Whereas on days where I chucked my hair up in a bun or a ponytail in 30 seconds whilst sat down, I didn't have the same crash. So often the smart monitoring gives us that really nuanced information to be able to try and work out exactly which bits of our day are the problem bits. And we can then take action to modify specific tasks or activities. If nothing else, I think it's very validating to look at a watch and for your watch to go, look, you're visibly and noticeably biomechanically tired. It feels better than just going, oh, I'm failing at being active, So you may find that is an appropriate way to get a little bit more information, a little bit more data. You can also potentially take that to a GP and say, look, I'm not sleeping. I'm tachycardic all the time because I've obviously got undiagnosed POTS, or, chronic stress, and get some appropriate support for that. But I definitely think speaking to Kim Claydon would be sensible. And I would definitely check out the Rest Room podcast. There is an awful lot of really, really, really good advice there, not just from me, from a whole range of experts, and from Natasha, who has spent literally decades fine-tuning her own self-management and is sharing some of the wisdom from that. So the Rest Room would be a sensible thing to have a look at. If nothing else, I think it will be nice to feel like you're not alone with that. So I hope that's helpful. Access to work assessor coming to my house on Wednesday next week. I've requested a riser recliner due to POTS, heads, and chronic fatigue syndrome, so I can work in a supported reclined position. They said it's an odd/unusual request. Do you have any specific or practical suggestions for a zero gravity reclined home office setup, please? Maybe to explain rise recliner laptop trays, best in desk office. Yeah, okay. So I think part of this is going to be explaining clearly why you benefit from being reclined and what the biomechanical problem with you being upright is. If they can grasp the fact that your body physically cannot cope being in an upright position, blood pooling, tachycardia, brain fog, all that kind of stuff. If they understand that, they will understand the reasoning behind you wanting a reclined workspace. You've got a couple of good options. The first one is to copy my setup, which is basically a rolling desk with an angle adjustable center panel over a hospital bed. Now, this is not a cheap setup, but I got the hospital bed as part of a discharge planning thing. So it wasn't an access to work thing. I got it from basically social services. That said, I see no reason why it couldn't be provided by access to work. What this particular setup does is allow me to recline or sit up the backrest of the chair and also change the angle of the desk. So I can tilt the desk up and lay down more, but maintain the correct eye line level between my vision and the screen, if that makes sense. So what you're looking to do is to replicate that. Now, if you can get yourself an angle adjustable desk and a height adjustable desk, something as simple as actually having a gamer chair might do the job. So computer gamers, generally speaking, have the best office furniture because what they're looking to do is to be comfortable for very extended periods of time whilst maintaining very little movement, and they don't want to pay for that afterwards and any kind of joint pain consequences. So gamer chairs are often angle adjustable, but also have a folding footrest under the actual chair that you can slide out and put your feet up on. You may find that that does the job because it allows you to adjust the angle, the height of the chair, and have a footrest or not as needed. And that might be something that there may be slightly more understanding of, and it would probably also be your most compact option in terms of workspaces. Riser recliners would do the same job as long as it's one that does the foot up recline. The difficulty with that is it's going to be a bit wider. And you may find that it's a little bit on the soft side in terms of positioning sometimes, but that's very much a personal preference issue. I personally love being in some kind of marshmallow type absorbing chair. Other people prefer something a little bit firmer when they're in work mode. But I think there are going to be elements of this that you won't really know until you try it. There are specific reclined home office setups. I can think of one, and I know of one person who got it funded by Access to Work. I'm just going to see if I can find it. But what we're basically looking at, reclining office setup 0G gravity. Let me see if I can find it. I'm pretty sure it was an American thingamajig to start up. ErgoQuest, that's the thing. Yeah, so it's ergoquest.com, ERGOQUEST. I think I know of one person in the UK who's got one and they absolutely loved it. It's basically a combination, I've just put a link in the chat. It's a combination of like reclining chair with attached computer screen and magnetic desk with a magnetic mouse on it. So you can move all the different bits and recline the whole setup and it all stays in one go. There is already somebody who's shared their setup in the chat, which looks very similar actually, reclining desk setup, mobile desk. So I think something like that would be your like super expensive option. It's just at what point along that sliding scale of massive expense can you convince them to settle, and what kind of a space are you attempting to fit this into? How often are you going to be using it? Because actually the 0G workspace ErgoQuest setup is fantastic for work, but you can't do anything else in it. Whereas a riser recliner, you can just sit in and read a book or chill out or do arts and crafts. And a mobile desk, you can do other things with. So yeah, part of that I think is going to be the kind of problem solving, what's the best option financially, what's the best option practically, and then what options have you got in terms of actually meeting your needs and where you're attempting to fit this setup in. So I hope that helps a little bit. Let me just scroll up again. Yeah, lovely. Lots of chat in there. Okay, lovely. Do you have any ideas on managing slipping rib syndrome? Oh, that's a sucky one. Yeah, slipping rib syndrome. So slipping rib syndrome is a standalone medical diagnosis in its own right, like it's a separate thing. You can also have subluxating ribs because of hypermobility, and they're not necessarily exactly the same thing. Subluxating ribs from hypermobility is a lot more common within like the hypermobility thing, but I think a lot of the time those terms are just used interchangeably. So it very much depends on where your ribs are going and what you're doing when that happens. It is it's a frustrating one because your ribs are useful for things like breathing. So having a rib not in the right place, it's very, very difficult to rest that because every time you inhale or exhale, you're moving the bit of you that hurts most. This also limits what we can do in terms of supporting a situation because anything that braces that area too much can have an impact on your breathing, which is obviously bad. So I did have some fairly serious issues with rib instability in my early 20s, I think. I use corsetry. I wore corsets quite a lot to help manage that. I also spent an awful lot of time playing wheelchair basketball. And actually, that was the thing that finally got enough strength and stability through my upper back and core muscles that it stopped being such a big issue. It does still happen to me now, but it's not like I can roll over in bed slightly more safely now, put it that way. You can essentially work on strengthening, but the difficulty with that is that you're going to need some form of pain management and you're going to need a coping strategy for when it still happens. So the overall peak management strategy is for you to get an awful lot stronger. And that involves your upper back muscles, your chest muscles, your core, how you move your shoulders, your head and neck, the whole area. Getting yourself a physiotherapist who understands that hypermobility is a full body issue and you can't just fix it with core exercises and nothing else is going to be essential for that. So generally speaking, Jeannie DeBon is my go-to recommendation for anything movement related because she has a real understanding of what it's like to have the kind of hypermobile body where it doesn't really feel like any of your individual sections are actually connected to the rest of you. She has a really great kind of loosely Pilates based approach. And what that does is work on connecting different muscle groups, different joint systems, and teaching you how to move as like a cohesive, glidey kind of movement rather than just bits of movement here or there. In terms of getting strong, that's basically your long-term approach. Your short-term approach does need to include the fact that that's not going to happen immediately. It might be painful along the way, and you're going to have injuries in the short term. So medical corsetry is something you can look into. I would strongly suggest not just buying off-the-shelf corsets. Either work with somebody who is a specialist in this to work out what fits your body measurements, or get something made custom, or go via NHS orthotics and get back bracing made for you to your exacting specifications. If you corset extensively and you're doing it with something that does not fit your measurements, you can do permanent harm to your body. So please don't look on that as like the easy solution. It might feel easy short term. It's not an easy one long term. It needs very careful management and you need to stay really, really physically fit kind of thing. If you are managing a lot of pain from that, TENS machine might be a really, really great option. So TENS, transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. TENS is basically 2 sticky electrodes and a battery pack. And what it does is give you a kind of tingly electric shock type sensation. And this works off pain gateway. So basically, your body has an upper limit for how much sensory input it can process at one time. Certain types of sensory input are given a higher priority than others. Pain is a surprisingly low priority. So what we can do is override pain sensations with high priority sensations like TENS or massage or tingly feelings or heat, cold, that kind of thing. So TENS is a great one that you can just walk around wearing for many hours and nobody will know. It is great. You can also combine that with things like painkillers and anti-inflammatories as well. So those would be my main kind of key suggestions for that. The other thing I would do is if you wear bras, go and get a bra fitting, because a lot of weight on the front of your chest, you know, and also the banding around your ribs. If you're not wearing an appropriately fitted bra, you can end up doing yourself some damage there. So likewise, if you wear binders or anything like that, get fitted by somebody who really, really knows what they're doing to make sure that whatever assets you've got up top are being supported or managed or concealed in a way that is appropriate for your kind of rib situation. Okay. Lovely. Right. Oh, lots of chat going on. Let me scroll down. Okay. I keep hearing from physios that strengthening muscles is going to ultimately prevent my hip from subluxing. Given that the muscles themselves don't cross the hip, but the connective tissue does and lines the capsule, what do you think about further strengthening in this case? I wonder if ever stronger muscles do not put further stress on the connective tissue, weakness and tendons, etc. Is this wrong thinking? Would appreciate your honesty. Okay. So the hip joint is an interesting joint, and it's a one I've spent a lot of time working on myself, and I'm currently in physio for right now. Basically, the hip joint, when you look at it, is a ball and socket joint, and it does an awful lot of different directions, and it weight bears pretty much constantly. That is a huge amount of strain on your hip joint, and it's very, very difficult to brace effectively, and it's very difficult to rest effectively. All of that means that hip injuries typically take a really long time to rehab, and it's very hard work because you have to be able to do your everyday life, but also fit in exercises. If you don't have the capacity to do your everyday life and exercises, and you try to, you end up with more pain as a result of trying to build that strength. So ultimately, there's not really anything we can do to make your ligaments work better. What we can do is work on your glutes, your hip flexors, your quads, your abdominal muscles, all of the muscles around those areas, so that your muscles are supporting that joint and facilitating really precise movement that is less likely to lead to injury. So essentially, it's not a fix, but it's the best that we've got. And it's probably going to be helpful. The downside is you are still going to have a hypermobile hip, meaning that you're still going to be prone to injuries no matter how strong you are, how fit you are, how great your muscle tone is, how toned your butt muscles are. You're still going to have rubbish ligaments. So there is always going to be a risk of pain and with injuries and things like that. What I found with a lot of people, and which was certainly true for myself, was that strengthening was such a difficult process. I couldn't get over that plateau because it was just, I'd strengthen a bit, then get injured again, and then set myself back a bit, and then I'd have to rest it. And then I never really made any progress. So one of the things that I found to be brilliant is lycra compression clothing. So I'll just grab my demonstration shorts. So there are 3 companies in the UK that now make bespoke lycra compression garments. So this is an old pair of my shorts back from when I had major hip issues many years ago. So the navy blue here is basically a pair of knee-length shorts, and the navy blue is single layer lycra. The light blue is multiple layers of lycra. So this circle here goes out to the outside edge of my hip as an example. and this blue layer at the back goes over my sacroiliac joints. So I've got quite a lot of extra postural support built in. So what these do is basically work on setting your hips in a neutral rest position. And if you have a default neutral position, you're more likely to use the appropriate muscle groups for movement, and you're less likely to accidentally leave a hip behind when you try and shuffle over in a chair or stand up or do any of the other things that are apparently really high risk for those of us with NAF ligaments. This was a game changer for me, and it has been for a lot of my clients, because what people found was that if you can drastically reduce the number of injuries you're having, the amount of inflammation you're walking around with, and the amount of pain that you're in, rehabilitation becomes a whole heck of a lot easier. So if you are finding that you are sort of plateaued and stuck and physios are just going more exercise, but it's not making any difference, a referral to an NHS orthotist specifically for lycra splinting is what I would recommend. So the 3 companies that do this are JobSkin, DMOrthotics, and Allard UK. With the totally bespoke ones, it can take a couple of weeks or even months to get you properly fitted. And then they'll last probably about a year before you need to have them replaced. That said, it is the thing that's been 100% worth it for me. I fully credit these with about 60% of my ability to walk, because I was just so badly stuck on this plateau. And it was only with these that I actually managed to get over that and build enough strength to be functional without them. So this all comes as part of a combination approach. What you may find is that actually, if you basically wear yourself out less with everyday existence, more of your energy and function can be poured into rehabilitation. So if you're finding that you're only really just about getting through the day and you've only got like this amount of energy to do rehab, using mobility aids during the day may save you some energy, so that a higher percentage of what you're doing with your hip function is actually geared towards improvement rather than simply getting from A to B and existing. So it may be that that combination approach of, yes, physio, but also appropriate pain management, compression garments, and mobility aids will hopefully be the kind of wonder combination that actually gets you a little bit more progress. Once you've made that progress, reassess and work out which bits of that approach are still needed. But yeah, hopefully that helps a little bit. Lovely. Okay. Fatigue and afternoon naps. Ooh. Oh, that's that weird thing. Naps and pacing. Yeah. Afternoon naps are an interesting one. So the proper sleep hygiene advice will tell you not to have naps in the afternoon. Naps are a morning thing. But what that doesn't really do is take into account the fact that lots of people don't sleep at like 9 p.m. So actually what you're looking to do is to have a decent gap between your last nap and when you go to sleep. And I'm talking like 5 hours, right? If you've got a 2 a.m. bedtime, cutting yourself off from naps at 12 in the afternoon is not practical. But what you can do is maybe not have naps within sort of 5 hours of when you go to bed. If you do find you need a nap within that 5 hour span, you might be better off just going to bed earlier. Just call it quits for the day and go and have a nap, like a proper sleep nap rather than just a curl up on the sofa nap. The other thing I would say is have a think about how long you're napping for. So the wonderful Kim Claydon was the one that put me onto this, but a full sleep-wake cycle naturally runs at about 90 minutes. So a 90-minute nap means that you wake up at the lightest part of your sleep cycle. So you wake up feeling refreshed. Whereas being yanked out of your really deep REM sleep by your alarm often leaves you feeling like you don't really know what day it is or where you are or what's going on. And it's just a really unpleasant way to wake up. So yeah, have a little think about maybe having 90-minute naps, but making sure you've got a big gap between your last nap and when you're attempting to go to sleep. if you are at the point where you feel like, you know, the bit where your laptop forces you to do the update that you've been ignoring for like 6 months, if you're having the kind of nap that feels like that, like your brain has just gone, nope, we're going on to standby mode now, it's turning off time, don't fight that, because what you're going to be doing in the time when you're fighting that is moving unsafely, thinking unclearly, and not looking after yourself. So if you are at the point where your body is physically forcing you to have a nap, give in to that and go and lay down, because you are not going to be really that safe doing anything else. Okay. Sorry, the chat is all over the place today. Can you offer advice for self-care for scars after surgery? I had a laparoscopic procedure 8 weeks ago and one of the scars is thickening, so I'm wondering if I can do anything to help it heal correctly. That's well outside my remit, I'm afraid. You are better off speaking with your GP surgery. I would imagine one of the nurses, even if it's district nursing service, actually will have real experience with post-surgical wound care, and they will be much better placed to help with that one. So yeah, definitely give your GP surgery a ring about that one, or phone the department that was responsible for doing the procedure in the first place. So sorry, I can't really help there. How do you get a diagnosis of chronic fatigue? This is an interesting one. It's a bit of it's one of those things my brain gets stuck on and it irritates me at 2 a.m. when I can't sleep. So chronic fatigue syndrome, one of the diagnostic criteria for chronic fatigue syndrome is to rule out, this is literally the first line of the diagnostic process, rule out any other condition that causes fatigue. So by that definition, nobody should have chronic fatigue syndrome as a comorbidity of hypermobility and POTS, because technically speaking, POTS and hypermobility both cause fatigue. So if we're speaking in really finite kind of minutiae detail type things, that's technically the accurate answer, is that you shouldn't have one as well as hypermobility. Realistically, obviously, quite a lot of people do have both diagnoses, either because they had the chronic fatigue diagnosis first and then somebody, usually the patient, works out that hypermobility is the linking factor afterwards, or because the level of fatigue they experience is so severe that it's seen as a standalone kind of diagnostic thing. So sometimes it's kind of worth doing from that perspective. That said, if you have symptomatic hypermobility, an expected symptom of that is fatigue, and that fatigue can be really severe. Like really like what we would class as being like severe ME type fatigue. You can have that from POTS. That's not like ruled out kind of thing. So yeah, that the final thing to consider really with all of this is that you don't have to have a CFS or ME diagnosis in order to access fatigue management advice. So all of the advice that you, or support or treatment that you should be getting, should not be condition dependent. It should be symptom dependent. So I don't have a CFS diagnosis, but if I went to my GP and said, I'm struggling with fatigue, can you refer me to a chronic fatigue service? My GP should say yes. So please don't feel pressured into seeking out a CFS diagnosis in order to get any form of support. Simply by being fatigued, you are already entitled to that support. And if you are not being given that support, the appropriate route would be either through your practice manager or through PALS or through a complaint. And if none of that works, maybe speak to an MP. But yeah, so basically it's quite a hard thing to diagnose. And I would have a think about why you want/need that diagnosis. Because if you're only getting it so that you can access support, you don't need it. You can just get the support. I hope that's making some sense. I feel like that was a bit of a weird, rambly answer. Yeah, okay. Podcasts and things. Where can people access kinesiology tape? at the least outlay? Are there any trial size packs in case it doesn't suit? Is it something that you can provide? How can sufferers learn to use it properly? Okay, so I tend to buy mine from either conferences like NADEX or from Amazon. You can get it on eBay. You can get it on pretty much any like sports physio website online. I would just have a search and shop around. A lot of places do trial size packs. And often if you email companies and say, I'm worried I'm going to be allergic or intolerant to it, they will send you little bits to try as a patch test. Generally speaking, OTs don't provide it simply because it tends to be more within the physiotherapy remit. If you are under a physiotherapist, you can ask them to teach you how to apply it. There are also tutorials all over the place on the internet, including the list on my Pinterest board that is further up the chat. So I hope that answers those ones. A family member has been sleeping without a pillow for years and has even low-filled front sleeper pillow exacerbates upper and mid-trap area pains. There doesn't seem to be anything flatter available. Ideas or thoughts? May this be detrimental for a face sleeper with hypermobility disorder? Without speaking to the person and seeing the setup and discussing symptoms, I don't think I can really answer that one, other than to say that pretty much everything sleep-related is personal preference. I've spoken to people who have spent thousands of pounds on beds, mattresses, pillows, combinations of things, and have eventually worked out that the cheap option or no option is best. It's not something that you can, there is no generic answer I can give. And I really, really wish there was, because so many people want the generic answer, but I can't give it. The only thing I would say, maybe speak to a physiotherapist about actually having an assessment on what's going on with that area of pain. It may be that with a little bit of rehabilitation and a little bit of appropriate pain management, that can be under better control, and it may give this person more options in terms of how they sleep. The other option may be that there are pillows out there with zips on where you can take some of the filling out, or you can replace more filling. So it may be that pillows like that would be a good option, because you could just take out most of the filling but still have a little bit of something to lay on. Yeah. Can the orthotics service tailor make shoe orthotics to help foot and knee pains, etc.? Has there been any advancements in these in recent years? Yes, there's been fairly significant advancement. So orthotics, as in shoe inserts, can either come from orthotics, the department, or they can come from podiatry. And what is available will very much depend on what contracts your local area has with what suppliers. But essentially, yes, it's a constantly evolving series of new adaptations and technologies, and there is new training coming out on a yearly basis. So yeah, it is an advancing area. People are getting much more fancy with what materials things are made out of. Some of them are customizable now, all that kind of stuff. So if you haven't seen anyone about that in a while and you think it might be appropriate, please do get a new referral and check that out. Lovely. Okie dokie. Bra doesn't work so well with my ribs as they are slipping. Any other alternative, please? Bra alternatives, tape, maybe. Like boob tape is a thing. It's basically extra wide kinesiology tape, and you can use it to kind of hold your boobs up, or as an alternative to wearing a binder, so you can flatten yourself out a little bit. Obviously, this probably isn't going to work if you are particularly well endowed. You may find that historical stays are another option, because they don't have underwiring but do have bone support. And the other option would be like compression tops or like sports vest tops that are longer line, because they won't cut in at the same area but will offer you some level of support still. But obviously it's not ideal, so hopefully some of those are helpful. But yeah, historical undergarments, boob tape, or long line compression tops would be my top things to try, I think. Can compression gloves help very icy POTS hands? Are they all the same in strength? Any good stockists or brands worth trying? Yes, compression gloves I think are fantastic. I live in them, please. They are brilliant. Just get them, try them all out. The company I tend to recommend is Chronically Colourful, and I tend to recommend them simply because they're prettier. Very much, most of them are pretty much the same, but Chronically Colourful custom tie-dyes theirs. If you use Jo10 at the checkout, you'll get 10% off as well. That's how obsessed I am with the brand. I have my own discount code. But yeah, compression gloves are a really, really good thing to try. Likewise, things like Turtle Doves, they make cashmere wrist warmers out of recycled jumpers. So wrist warmers can be a really good way of just keeping your circulation a little bit better. You can also get USB plug-in electric gloves. Those are a thing. So they have a heating element that goes on the back and the palm of your hand, and it fits inside gloves and then plugs into like phone battery packs. So you can walk around with electric hands, which in winter is an absolute game changer, particularly for anyone who uses mobility aids. So you can't put your hands in your pockets. So yeah, give those a go. Thank you, Magic Joe. I love that Magic Joe is a thing that's caught on. Okay. Local orthotic department in Hertz said they don't produce any compression garments. Just because they don't doesn't mean they can't access it. That sounds like a brush off to me. So just if your local department does not have an orthotist who is trained in fitting them, all three of those companies I mentioned, so JobSkin, DMO, and Allard UK, can send certified fitters to come and measure you in an appointment. So I would maybe argue that one a little bit and say just because they can't doesn't mean you can't have them. Allard, in fact, only send their own fitters. They don't accept measurements from a generic hospital orthotist. So it should still be an option for you. It might just be a little bit of a fight to get them. Is there a route via the GP? Yeah, speak to your GP about a referral for that. When somebody can't wear abdominal binders, is it worth trying knee-high socks for POTS? What strengths do these need to be? Any good stockists? So for POTS management, as a general rule, you're looking for class 2 compression stockings, UK class 2 compression stockings. Knee-high might be helpful, but actually I would recommend thigh-high. So thigh-high stockings you can either get as like silicone grippy hold-ups or as stockings and wear them with a suspender belt. So you get some of the benefits of tights, but without the abdominal compression and without having to dislocate your thumbs, getting out of them quickly when you realize you need the loo desperately. So yeah, thigh-high compression stockings would be an option. The last few pairs I've bought, I got from Medi UK, MEDI. You can also get them on prescription from your GP, and you can often buy them in pharmacies as well. If they're prescribed by your GP, you'll probably have to be measured by somebody at the pharmacy, whereas if you are buying them yourself, you just grab a tape measure and work it out. But class 2 compression stockings, Medi is a good place to check out. If you're feeling particularly flush, Medi has a range of coloured ones, which might be nice for one-off formal outfits, as an example, or if you have a kind of signature colour scheme or work uniform that you need to match. So, yeah. I'm just trying to cram in. We are officially out of time. Have I got any questions left? Okay. First time I've heard anyone talk about hypermobility other than my I could cry. Oh, I'm happy I could give you the community feels. Please come back next time. There will be more community feels. Chronic fatigue services generally give advice around pacing and energy conservation. That said, I do that too, but via video chat, so you haven't got to get out of bed. Not that I'm highly of the belief that my service is superior, but you know. Yeah, basically energy conservation advice. There may also be advice around how to adapt exercise, and there are quite often physiotherapists who are specially trained to do very low energy exercise routines as well. But generally speaking, most of it will be pacing advice. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. But if you're in any doubt, it's sometimes worth getting your GP to speak to somebody just to find out what they can offer. And then you can make a more kind of informed decision as to whether or not you want to actually do that. Okay. I think I am officially out of time. So what I'm going to do is just write down all the questions that we haven't got to, and I will start with those next month. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep talking and talking, and we'll be here forever. So I'm going to do my own pacing and go and have a lay down. But thank you all so much for coming. Please do check out the events section of the HMSA website and the link in the chat to my joint protection session, which is coming up in November. It would be great to see some of you there as well. Please do come back next month. This is the third Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. UK time. Sometimes I will have exciting special guests. If you have any feedback for me, please do pop it in the chat, or email or message the HMSA. And if there is anyone you would particularly like me to get as a special guest, please do pop that in the chat as well, so that I can pester the medical advisory team into joining me. Yeah, thank you very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your evenings. Take care, everyone. Bye.